Here, it's not much, but please, this is all the money I have. I handed the man an envelope with my entire paycheck. It was after school one day. Recently, I'd started a part-time job, and with my first paycheck in hand, I was heading to a department store to buy some dishes I thought my grandma would like as a gift. That's when I saw a father and child standing on a bridge by the river, looking worn out. As I walked past them, "Please, could you spare some money?" The man, who seemed to be the father, directed this plea at me. Surprised, I looked closer at the pair. The child's arm was severely burned. "A burn," I said without thinking, and he replied, "Yes. Unfortunately, I don't even have money to take him to the hospital. I actually did have money on me today, but this was the money I'd saved to celebrate my grandma's birthday. I knew there was only one thing I could do. My name is Will Taylor. Since I was little, my grandma taught me an important lesson. Kindness isn't just for others. It always finds a way back to you." This was my grandma's motto, and true to her words, she always put others before herself. I lost my parents when I was young, and from age 4, my grandma raised me. She was a gentle woman, always with a smile, and she raised me, her only family, with so much care. Though her legs weren't strong enough for work, and she lived on a modest pension, life wasn't luxurious. But even in our small old house, I was happy eating her simple, warm meals and spending calm days with her. However, my grandma, who valued others more than herself, often faced people who took advantage of her kindness. Even with dubious sales pitches, I think her sharp instincts saw through the schemes. Yet she'd still buy things, saying, "If I don't, that person will struggle." Despite her difficulty walking, she'd take on thankless jobs in the neighborhood just because that grandma can't say no. Once, I overheard some neighborhood ladies gossiping about her, which made me mad, so I told her. But she just smiled and said, "If nobody else wants to do it, then I'm happy to help." That's who my grandma is. Grandma can't say no. She just doesn't say no. She's nothing like you people who just complain and rely on others. I wanted to go tell those ladies off immediately, but Grandma shook her head and said no. It's okay if they don't understand. Kindness goes around and someday it comes back to you, right? I've heard it 100 times. I've got it memorized. Seeing me give up on confronting those people, my grandma chuckled. "You're such a good kid, Will." Over and over, Grandma's kindness had cost her. That was a fact, but she always seemed unbothered, smiling peacefully, as if that didn't matter at all. So even as a child, while I worried about her, deep down, I believed kindness given to others eventually comes back to you. Because of that, I naturally became the kind of person who chose to put others before myself. But as I grew older, I started facing moments that made me question if all that kindness was a waste. Committees no one wanted, taking others' turns cleaning, carrying classmates' shoes. None of it was about how I felt. If someone needs this, I'll step in and help, I thought. But I soon noticed that while they said thanks on the surface, they actually saw me as the guy they could easily use. "Sorry, my family's in the hospital, and I need to go visit them ASAP." Every day, that classmate would ask me to switch with him for bathroom cleaning duty. "Oh, sure, go ahead and visit them soon." I'd agree without hesitation, only to hear him laugh later. "You really lie so easily, don't you? Just going to karaoke." Don't worry about him. He's a phony anyway, probably happy to help. I'd overheard these comments more times than I could count. Even then, I kept telling myself that being kind to others was the right thing to do. But others saw me as a people pleaser or mocked me as so desperate to be liked. Even though I wasn't doing anything wrong, I rarely had anyone I could call a friend. Am I doing something wrong? By my junior year, that question had started echoing in my mind. Grandma, as always, kept sacrificing herself to be kind to others. But was it really coming back to her? Or was she just being taken advantage of because of her kindness? I couldn't bring myself to talk to her about it, so I kept stewing over it day after day. Then, one day, it was my grandma's 80th birthday. I'd recently started a part-time job and planned to buy her some dishes she'd love as a gift. After school, I was on my way to the department store when I saw a father and child on a bridge by the river. They looked homeless. I'd seen homeless people before, but a young man in his 30s with a child, that was new to me. Maybe that's why. I couldn't help but glance over at them. Then, please, could you spare some money? The man, who seemed to be the father, asked me. What? Even asking a high schooler? I was surprised, and as I looked closer at them, I noticed the child's arm was severely burned. A burn, I said without thinking, and the man replied, Yes. I'm ashamed to say we don't even have money for the hospital. The father looked shaken, and the child, likely due to the severity of the burn, was on the verge of passing out. Today, I had more money on me than usual. But this was the money I'd saved to celebrate my grandma's birthday. It was meaningful to me, so I hesitated for a moment. But I knew there was only one thing I could do. Here, it's not much, but please, this is all the money I have. I handed the envelope with my entire paycheck to the man who seemed to be the father. Looking inside, he gasped, This much, are you sure? Yes, please take it all. Hurry and get him to the hospital. As I said this, the man appreciated, then ran off, carrying his child. This was the right thing to do. I was certain that my grandma would be happier knowing what I did rather than receiving a gift of dishes. I could almost picture her face, smiling as she'd say, Will, you're so thoughtful. Thank you for remembering what I taught you. Later, I noticed some spare change in my pocket from when I bought a drink at school that afternoon. With just enough for one flower, I bought a single bloom from a nearby flower shop and reached home about an hour later than usual. Then, Grandma, I found her collapsed in the living room. I immediately called for an ambulance, but the paramedics told me that by the time they arrived, she was no longer breathing. And just like that, my grandma was gone forever. It wasn't an accident or a crime, just a sudden death that could happen at her age. The hospital staff tried to comfort me, saying there was nothing anyone could do. But what if I had come home at my usual time? I couldn't stop myself from thinking that. If I had noticed my grandma collapsed even a bit earlier, maybe she could have survived. If I'd ignored the homeless man and run straight home, I might have gotten back sooner. It was all just what ifs, and I knew it was pointless to dwell on them. Even so, I couldn't help but feel that way. Was my grandma truly happy? Believing that someday kindness comes back to you, she willingly let herself be taken advantage of, only to die alone in the end. In the end, did anything good really come of it? At that moment, everything I had believed in crumbled inside me. My grandma had shown me firsthand that sacrificing yourself for others doesn't lead to anything good. So from then on, I vowed I would never be kind for someone else's sake again. Maybe it was a reaction to everything that happened, but I ended up falling into this extreme way of thinking. After that, my life became the exact opposite of what it had been. I stopped trusting people, and helping others was out of the question. I only looked out for myself, avoiding anything that might cause me trouble or loss. As a result, it was no surprise that people disliked me. During my school years, people called me self-centered, antisocial, and boring. Once I entered the workforce, it was uncooperative, cold-hearted, and hard to get along with, and people avoided me. Whether I acted for others or put myself first, people still judged me. So why not choose the path where I lose nothing? After years of living alone, that mentality became ingrained in me. I still feel grateful to my grandma and haven't stopped loving her. But at the same time, I can't help but pity her for ending her life believing in a pointless virtue, having gained nothing from it. I wish I could have realized the truth sooner and told her. Of course, it's far too late now. Naturally, with this mindset, I never had a girlfriend, let alone got married. At some point, I found myself at 40. With no family or friends, I was truly alone in the world. Beer is my only pleasure, so I'll probably die young. Not that it matters, no one would miss me, and that's a relief. It was another Friday evening after a long week. I headed to my usual bar and started drinking American beer at the counter. Being Friday, the place was packed, and just then, a new customer walked in. The familiar bartender looked at him and said, "Hey buddy, sorry, but as you can see, it's full. There's a spot next to this grumpy old guy. Though what'll it be?" I was the grumpy old guy, but even if I am a regular, that's a pretty harsh thing to say to a paying customer. Not that it bothered me much. This bartender is about the only person I feel comfortable around. He's a bit older than me, and no matter what I say, he just laughs it off. Easygoing, sure, but it's exactly that light-hearted attitude that makes him easy to be around. He doesn't know my past or who I was at work. Maybe that's why I can drink here without a care. Then I heard the scrape of the chair next to me. It seemed that the man who had just come in decided to sit right beside me. "Excuse me, I'll sit next to you." He looked like he was in his late 20s. A clean-cut young guy with short hair and an expensive suit. Not my type. I honestly don't get what guys like him are thinking. Yeah, I had zero interest in drinking with him, so I answered curtly. "See, grumpy, right. But watch once he starts drinking. He's got a cute side. His face goes red in no time." The bartender said this to the young guy, laughing loudly. "Shut up. Really? Is that true?" Instead of feeling awkward, the young guy seemed amused, which surprised me. Most people would back off if I looked this unfriendly. Maybe it was the unexpectedness of it or the effect of the beer, but we actually hit it off that night. I didn't ask him about his age, job, or personal details, but I knew his name was Steve. It felt nice, just enjoying that moment together, without any care for who we were in our daily lives. We were probably different in age and personality, but it was strange. It felt natural. I never expected you two to hit it off like this, but it's past midnight, so time to wrap it up, all right? The bartender's comment made me realize how late it had gotten. Even though I was a bit tipsy, I wasn't about to admit how much fun I'd had. Yeah, got it. As I prepared to settle the bill. Will, I had an awesome time tonight. Let's definitely do this again sometime. Steve said, completely straightforward and sincere, a bit embarrassing, honestly. Looking at him, I felt a strange sense of nostalgia, like I was seeing my younger self. This guy probably doesn't yet realize that being too nice just leads to being taken advantage of. Yeah, if we run into each other. I replied with that and paid the bill before leaving the bar. I had to admit, tonight was actually fun. When was the last time I'd felt that way? After that, Friday nights at that bar with Steve became a regular thing. Of course, we weren't making any formal plans or anything. But going to that bar every Friday was already part of my routine. And since Steve kept showing up at the same time, it just naturally happened. At first, I didn't share much about myself, but maybe I was drinking too much while talking. Or maybe I was just excited to have what felt like a real drinking buddy. Before I knew it, I'd started telling him stories about my past. Believing in my grandma's teachings, I gave away all my savings, which was fine and all. But when I got home, she'd passed away. She was always thinking of others, but in the end, that's what left her alone to die. That's when I realized there's no point in sacrificing yourself for others. Steve, it's good to be honest and kind, but don't overdo it, okay? There's no happiness in giving up your own for the sake of someone else's. For once, I'd shared something personal, and maybe it was too much. Steve, who always found something to laugh about in every story, was just staring at me, wide-eyed, surprised. Sorry for the downer story. Guess I'm just drunk. I'll head out for tonight. I'd finally found a place where I felt at ease, and I went and ruined it myself. I really thought I messed up this time. I'd been enjoying our time as drinking buddies, and instead, I'd turned it into some self-centered lecture. After that, things felt awkward, and I couldn't bring myself to go back to that bar on Friday. Honestly, part of me was scared. Scared to show up at our usual time and find Steve wasn't there. Then one day at work, a female subordinate approached me. Will, I don't think I'll be able to finish this project by the deadline. I sighed and asked, why not? My subordinate darted her eyes around, clearly scrambling for an excuse. What? Why? You asked. I checked in multiple times, asking, are you sure you'll finish on time? And every time, while you were chatting and dawdling, you brushed it off, saying, still plenty of time. And now, at the last minute, you're telling me you can't finish. Do you really think I'm just going to say, oh well? She was at a loss for words. Well, even so, I could say the same. There are still 2 days left. Even if it's tight, putting in some overtime to get it done sounds like the right thing to do. What? That's harassment. You could at least help a little. She was getting upset unfairly. If you call this harassment, feel free to report it to the higher UPAS. I'll just stick to the facts, and I have enough work of my own that I don't have time to clean up your mess. With that, I walked away. I know my words weren't gentle, but people who take work lightly and only think about their own convenience, unless you spell it out for them, they won't understand. Honestly, I think it's a waste to spend my time and energy wording things carefully for someone that irresponsible. Before I was even out of earshot, she started whispering behind my back. thought he'd softened up lately, but his nasty attitude is still the same. What a useless old guy. He's probably still single at his age because he's got such a nasty personality. Do they realize how ridiculous their gossip sounds? How does my being single impact them in any way? They don't even seem aware that their own idle chatter is what's actually disrupting the flow of work around here. Sigh. After leaving the office, I let out an unexpectedly deep sigh. I've long since grown used to hearing that kind of gossip, but thought he'd softened up lately. That part stuck with me. I never intended to change, but maybe having a drinking buddy had brought some kind of shift in my attitude. Honestly, I'd been aware of it, at least a little. And now that I'd lost that small source of joy, I could feel my interest in life slipping away again. Even so, I still couldn't bring myself to return to that bar. Then one day, living without caring about others, focusing only on yourself. From the day I decided to focus solely on myself, I knew there'd be a risk of creating enemies, and that one day it might catch up to me. And then, that day actually arrived. It was the day of an important meeting with a potential major client. I brought along that subordinate, but, holding a grudge against me, she deliberately sabotaged my efforts. The data I'd spent extensive time preparing had been entirely deleted. I had hard copies as backup, of course, but those too had conveniently vanished from my bag. I noticed this as we waited for the client to enter the room. At this point, there was no way to salvage the situation. The client soon entered, clearly displeased when I couldn't provide the documents. And with good reason. We'd had plenty of time leading up to this date. So having neither documents nor data gave the impression of complete lack of effort. My subordinate, who should have been on my side, instead turned against me, saying, "Excuses just look pathetic. If you missed the deadline, you should just apologize properly." It was clear now, her plan had always been to undermine me. The client, siding with her, added, "She's right. Aren't you embarrassed to be lectured on professionalism by someone decades younger than you?" Since they didn't know the full story, their reaction was understandable. As much as it stung, I could only offer a sincere apology to the client. Then, suddenly, "Hold on a moment." A voice I'd heard before caught my attention. I lifted my head slightly and looked toward the voice. What? There, standing before me, was Steve. And to my surprise, the client's team addressed him as President. President. I couldn't fully process what was happening. Steve nodded at me briefly, then turned to his employees to get a sense of the situation. During the initial discussions, Will was handling things with sincerity, right? So, in my view, it seems unusual that he would arrive today without any materials. Shouldn't we first inquire about the circumstances? Thanks to Steve's intervention, I finally had a chance to explain what had led to this situation. Even if it sounds like an excuse, the documents and data I'd prepared disappeared by the time I arrived this morning. I take responsibility for my lack of crisis management. I apologize sincerely. I greeted deeply once more. If the data disappeared, it could have been deleted accidentally or removed intentionally. Given that the documents are also missing, the latter seems more likely. Can you check the data's activity log? Steve suggested. Of course. If data vanishes suspiciously, checking the activity log is standard procedure. Activity log. My subordinate seemed completely unaware such a method even existed, that I'd nearly been set up by someone like her. I should have been more thorough myself. In the end, it was revealed that this subordinate was responsible for the commotion. The incident reached our company president through Steve, and she received disciplinary action. As for me, I later prepared the materials again, and the project moved forward as planned. But I wanted to thank Steve, though meeting with him as a company president wasn't easy. So, after much deliberation, I decided to visit our usual bar for the first time in a while, prepared to feel disappointed if he wasn't there. But when I entered the familiar place, there he was at the counter. "Hey, long time no see. This guy here has been waiting for you every single week." Hearing the bartender's words almost brought tears to my eyes, but saying that out loud was out of the question. So I just took my usual seat in silence. Even Steve seemed different, the air between us somehow tense. Honestly, it was awkward, but I decided to start with what I needed to say. "Thanks for the other day. You really saved me." Seeing me greeted, Steve seemed to understand right away. "No need for that, please. Raise your head." Then he continued, "Actually, there's something I've wanted to apologize to you for. Would you mind hearing me out?" Something to apologize for. There was plenty I was grateful for, but nothing that came to mind for him to apologize about. Steve rolled up his right sleeve. Now that I thought about it, he always wore long sleeves, even in the summer. On his arm was a large scar. "What's that?" "When I was a kid, I got burned. My father had failed in business, and for a while we were homeless. During that time, a passerby set us on fire as a cruel joke. We had no money for a hospital and were completely helpless. But then, a student helped us." I couldn't possibly forget that story. It matched exactly with the unusual event that happened on the day my grandmother passed away. My father and I were deeply grateful to that person, even though we didn't know his name. We always wanted to find a way to repay him, but had no means to do so. But when you told me about that day a few months ago, Will, I was stunned. I realized it was you. And when I heard that the time you spent with us meant you couldn't be there for your grandmother, I was overwhelmed with guilt. Thank you so much for what you did back then, and I'm truly, truly sorry. Was it the beer? No, that wasn't it. I hadn't even taken a sip. Against my usual character, tears were welling up. Deep down, I'd always known. No one was to blame for my grandmother's death. Even if there were someone to blame, she would never have wanted me to live a life cursing them. But to survive alone, I had no choice but to resent the kindness my grandmother had believed in. For all these years, I'd wondered if my act of helping a homeless father and son was the right choice or a mistake. I couldn't quite believe it myself. But that little boy, barely conscious back then, had grown into the remarkable person standing before me now. Not only that, but he'd become my only drinking buddy, here to express his heartfelt thanks. My choice. The kindness my grandmother taught me to show others wasn't wrong. Realizing that, tears began to flow. I'm truly sorry. Misunderstanding the meaning of my tears, Steve apologized deeply once again. "No, that's not it. I'm happy, thank you. Knowing that you're alive and well has saved both me and my grandmother. I wasn't wrong. Maybe I did save you and your father that day, but right now, I'm the one being saved. Come to think of it, without Steve's help in the data loss incident, I might have lost my job by now. In that sense, Steve really did save me. Kindness isn't just for others. The kindness I once gave truly came back to help me now. Grandma, are you watching? Your lesson was real. I doubted it for so long, but thank you for teaching me something so important. Then, Steve and I raised our glasses and toasted with more strength than ever.